Okay.
Go.
Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Schmidt, and my presentation is entitled, Are You Climate Smart? John, we all set? Great.
Yeah.
All right. I'll let you know. I'll say next slide when I'm ready for you to transition. So I'm going to talk about energy use and carbon emissions. They're all unique to each of us. I'm going to talk about how the use of energy in our homes has changed drastically over the past 10, 20, 30 years. So it's good to know what it's like now. I'm going to talk about something called beneficial electrification, and that is moving towards clean electricity for all our energy needs. And then I'm going to talk about 4 simple steps for decarbonization. I've got a background of mechanical engineering. That's what I got my initial degree in. Then I went back to the Stanford Business School. I've also been a representative to the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Organization for a couple of years. And we work very closely with PG&E as a vendor for energy efficiency programs. Okay, next slide, John. So I did this presentation right before the shutdown in early March. One of my old and favorite mechanical engineering teachers at Stanford, a guy named Gil Masters, was retiring, and he invited me into his classroom to do one of his guest lectures. And this was my first slide to them. It's that it's really not their fault that they have to deal with a world that is getting much, much harder. So I start out by saying, look, we did this. It was my generation that made most of this problem. And the world is warming up very, very fast. And I'm very sorry about this. They're the ones that are going to have to fix it. But I wanted to let them know that I at least apologize. Next slide, please. And this is just getting worse. This is now looking like 2020 is going to be the warmest year on record. And John, one more slide. There's also been a great increase in the number of huge events, disasters. Next slide, please, John. The number of billion-dollar disasters in the United States continues to grow, even if you adjust for inflation. John, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Could you, next slide, please? Uh-oh.
Is this not the slide?
I'm sorry, I've just lost my connection via the video, but I'll try and reconnect. So if you're showing the slide of the graph that shows billion-dollar events, then it's just gone up over the last 40 years. The graph shows the number of terrible billion-dollar disasters from 1980 to 2020, and it just keeps getting worse. So now I can't see the slide. Could you go to the next slide and tell me what the title is?
It's Steve's carbon emission by source.
Aha, okay. So I was a climate denier for a very long time and really just became convinced it was an issue around 2000. So what happened was I started tracking my own carbon emissions, and it's hard to do, but what you find out from that is where your emissions are coming from. John, is this the slide that shows the worldwide emissions?
Historic and projected cumulative emissions. I'm not sure what you mean.
Yeah, hang on just a second. I'll get to it. Give me just 1 sec. Okay, so I think we skipped a slide that says what's measured improves. I don't know if you showed that one, but that's basically the idea that we need to understand where our emissions are coming from before we can figure out what to do about them. And that next slide, John, if you can get to the one that says a 90% reduction in my carbon footprint.
John, go back one, yeah.
So this shows that on a per capita basis, the United States is still way ahead of any other country in terms of carbon emissions per capita. And this shows a couple different countries, a couple different regions of the world, and I've superimposed on that my personal carbon emissions, both way back in around 2000 or 1997, and then now, or most recently, in 2019. And what I can talk about is how it's very easy for us to take a couple of key actions to reduce our carbon emissions and still get a great quality of life. So let's go to the next slide. So that's my next one is the Steve's carbon emissions by source. I don't expect any of you to do this, but I'm kind of a geek, and I was tracking very, very closely things like how many miles we traveled in our cars, how many miles we flew, how much meat we were eating, train travel, water use, electric use, natural gas use. And over a period of maybe 15 years, we were able to gradually reduce our carbon emissions. And my goal, this is kind of a personal goal that I took on, is to see what it would be like to live a life with a carbon budget that is, the United Nations projects that by 2050, we'll all be able to emit only 1 metric ton of carbon per year. So I wanted to see what it was like to live like that. Well, I'm now at about 2.5, and it's not that bad. So not only is it not that bad, it's still a wonderful life. So let's go to the next slide. It says, what's your footprint? It's very, very hard to track all your emissions, but there are some great tools that make it very easy to give you a rough idea of where your emissions are coming from. This one is from Berkeley, and it's the URL is at the bottom, coolclimate.org/calculator. And if you try this out, you can really figure out in a matter of 10 or 15 minutes which particular source of emissions is the thing for you to focus on. And usually it's transportation and home energy. So now let's go to the next slide. Regarding home energy, that's what I want to talk about next. So in terms of your home energy use, there's really 3 different contributors. The building itself, the home itself, how efficient is the heater? How efficient is the air conditioning? How efficient is the insulation? Then there's a whole bunch of stuff that's inside it that uses energy. That category of stuff has grown tremendously over the last 20 years. And then there's our behavior. When we walk out of a room, do we turn the lights off? Do we leave the TV running all the time, even when no one's watching it? These 3 categories are key in determining how much energy we use. And what we found through our company is that the smart meter data can identify each of these different categories. So next slide talks just briefly about what we learn from smart meter data. So this is what we developed a company to do and provide a free service to all PG&E customers to disaggregate or kind of analyze your home energy use to figure out which categories of energy use are high, which ones are normal, which ones are very efficient. And in these 2 cases, 2 different homes with almost the exact same annual PG&E bill, you can see that the home on the left really has a problem with winter space heating. So maybe they have a really inefficient furnace or they have no insulation. The home on the right, however, over 50% of their energy use is going to something we call electric base load. And that is electricity that's used all the time. And we see this quite a bit. So let's go to the next slide. This is actually a term from another Los Altos Hills resident, Peter Evans, and I started working on big houses in Los Altos Hills about 15 years ago. And what we discovered was that there's an awful lot of waste in these buildings, not just electricity, but also natural gas waste and water waste. And he coined the term true waste. In other words, it's not doing anything useful. We're still paying for it. It's still using up the world's resources, but it's not doing anything useful. So let's go to the next slide. So this is an example of true waste in my own home. These were my plug loads, things that are plugged in around the house back in 2009. I gave my daughter, Justine, she was about 13 years old at the time. I gave her a kilowatt meter. And this is a device that you can plug into the wall and you plug anything into it. and you can figure out how much energy it's using, both when it's in use and also when it's not in use. And what I found startled me. She went around the house on what I thought would be a project that would take a couple hours, and it took her days to find all the things plugged in around the house. And this is a tag cloud that shows the things. There's 93 terms in here. Many of them you can't see because they're so small. That means they were insignificant in terms of the amount of energy they used. But look at the aquarium. Look at the surround sound system. The surround sound system on the right, that was my son's surround sound system in his room. He had been away at college for a year already. So it was totally a wasteful energy use. So let's go to the next slide. This is not just my house. This is happening all over. And the California Energy Commission came up with a startling piece of information that 86% of the new residential energy growth, in other words, the increase in energy use in homes, the vast majority of that for the next 6 more years comes from miscellaneous, which means it's not your heater, it's not your furnace, it's not your air conditioner, it's not your lighting, it's not your refrigerator, it's miscellaneous. So let's go to the next slide. These are some examples of kind of miscellaneous energy waste. And the first category is things that are just kind of forgotten, that we didn't remember, we completely missed. So the top left is $8,000 a year in energy cost for a pool pump because the timer had been disabled. The pump was running 24/7. That's a huge amount of waste. Bottom left, we've got 2 electric resistance heaters that were always on, and they were in an unoccupied space. Someone just forgot to turn them off. Top right, fans set up in the crawl space a long time ago to try and get rid of some moisture and forgotten. They couldn't hear them, so they just forgot, and they were running all the time. And then bottom right, this was a resident in Mountain View actually, where couldn't understand why his energy bill was so high, and it was because his fan on his thermostat was set to on, meaning it was running all the time, and he didn't intend that to happen. Next slide. Then there's other devices that are just surprisingly inefficient. Things like outdoor lighting with halogen bulbs that was on all night long. That's $700 a year. Bottom left, a continuous hot water recirc pump that's circulating hot water through your house day in and day off, day out. Always, even when you're on vacation and not using any hot water. That can be $800 a year. Heated towel racks. Some of these, I have one that I use in some of my presentations. I bring it with me and show people how nice it looks. It's a beautiful chrome towel rack. It's using 120 watts all the time, and that works out to about $400 a year of electricity just to have warm towels. You can put that on a timer, and it's easy to fix. Old fridges are also terrible. Refrigeration technology has gotten much, much better. And the old fridges use an enormous amount of electricity. So if you've got one in the garage that's keeping a couple things cold, consider replacing it. Next category is getting nothing for this. So many people have these Insta-Hot hot water dispensers, and they're really useful to make a cup of tea. But if they're on all the time and they're not on a timer, then they're wasting an awful lot of electricity when you're not using it. Bottom left, there's so many different devices in our house, electronics that use lots and lots of electricity. Many of these things, you can kind of tell if they're in this category. If you put your hand on the device and it's warm, that's a bad sign. So we found whole home audio amplifiers in closets that haven't been used in years, but are wasting an enormous amount of electricity. Electrically heated bathroom floors are also pretty bad because some of them are on year-round, unknown to the residents. And then finally, things like rates. There's a huge variety in electric rates right now from PG&E. Can be 3 or 4 times as bad. So if, for example, if you're charging your EV during peak times, you can be spending far more money than you need to. Okay, let's go to the next page. So this is the summary. This is the service we offer is free to all PG&E customers. PG&E pays us based on measured energy savings. And so far, our average is about 13% per resident for over a year, just by going through this analysis to see where your energy is being used, where it's being wasted, and so forth. So I encourage you all to sign up, hi.hea.com. There's no cost. We don't sell anything. We don't, if you need work like a new furnace or something, we can direct you to someone, but we don't get any referral fees. We are totally unbiased. All right, next slide. Everybody can still hear me, right?
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Yes, I can
So,
hear you very well.
Great, thank you, Michelle. So this beneficial electrification has to do with a few main sources of carbon emissions. This pie chart that we're looking at has is for a typical home. It's not really for a big Los Altos Hills home, but there are a number of key categories of greenhouse gas emissions. Just starting from the top right, the blue, there's greenhouse gas emissions that come from electricity. There's greenhouse gas emissions from gasoline and jet fuel, things for transportation. Then the orange is from your natural gas use in your house. And then there's a bunch of other miscellaneous sources. So John, if you click next, what you can do is if you start using this clean electricity and you switch some of these other uses, let's say away from gasoline towards electricity, away from natural gas towards electricity, you can greatly reduce your carbon emissions. And this is a reduction of 78%. So get rid of 3/4 of your emissions through this beneficial electrification. And I'll talk more about what that means. Okay, next slide. So with 4 actions, literally just 4 actions, you can reduce this. Typical home could reduce its emissions by 3/4. First step, make sure you're using clean electricity. Even PG&E's electricity right now is quite clean, but you can get 100% clean electricity from Silicon Valley Clean Energy, and it actually doesn't cost you anything more. Just by doing that, we're going to get rid of that blue slice of the pie. That goes away. So you don't have to change your electric use at all. You just have to change the source of your electric use. Step 2, that big red chunk of the pie is transportation. If you can get an electric vehicle and drive using electricity instead of gasoline, that can be a huge reduction in your carbon footprint. Next one is, the next 2 really focus on natural gas. That's the orange section of the pie. If you switch from a natural gas water heater to a heat pump water heater, it's far more efficient, and it doesn't emit any carbon if you're using clean electricity. And the same thing is true for your heating your house. If you switch to a heat pump, you will get rid of the carbon emissions from your natural gas use. So literally, it's 4 steps. Let's go to the next slide. So if you switch to an EV, not only are they great fun to drive. So my wife and I drove down here in a Tesla, and we're in Austin, Texas. And it is a fantastic car to drive. If you haven't tried one, I encourage you to get a test drive. But it also has a huge impact on your carbon footprint. So not only is it a fun car with lots of torque and lots of power, but it's also very, very clean. So the amount of carbon emissions for a new car, if it's a gasoline car, it's going to be huge emissions over the lifetime of that car. Whereas if your next car is an electric vehicle, the carbon emissions can be 0 if you're getting clean electricity. Next slide. I don't know if you've all heard about heat pumps, but they've been around for a long, long time. Your refrigerator is a heat pump. All it does is move heat from inside the refrigerator into the kitchen. That's what a heat pump does. What's changed is that they've become far more efficient. So they can move heat much more efficiently than creating heat. So I think my next slide, yes, go to the next slide and we can talk about water heating. There's a lot of different ways to make hot water for your home. These are 4 different options. The top left is a normal natural gas tank water heater. Their efficiency is about 58%. That means if you put in 100 BTUs of natural gas, that's energy, you get out about 58 BTUs of hot water. That would be 58% efficiency. Bottom left is more efficient. That's a tankless water heater. Those were really the focus. Anyone that wanted to be really efficient 10 years ago would switch to a tankless water heater because they're 79% efficient. 100 BTUs of natural gas in a tankless hot water heater makes 79 BTUs of hot water. Then you get to the top right, an old electric tank water heater. These things were very, very common and are still common in the Southeast and in the Southwest. In the South, because electricity is much cheaper than in California. And they're more efficient yet. So 93% efficiency means 100 BTUs of electricity going into this device produces 93 BTUs of hot water. Now we start talking about heat pumps. Those first three create heat by taking the energy going in and either burning it like natural gas, or with electricity, basically they just run the electricity through a big resistor to heat up the water. These heat pumps are moving heat from one place to another. So it can actually be more than 100% efficient. What that means is that a heat pump with an efficiency, or they call it a COP, coefficient of performance, of 3, means that you put in 100 BTUs of electricity and you get 300 BTUs of hot water. The one I installed in my house last summer actually has an efficiency of 3.5. In other words, 100 BTUs of electricity going into this heat pump water heater produces 350 BTUs of hot water. They are incredibly efficient. Next slide. So in order to move our homes off of natural gas, we have to make a market transformation. We have to convince people to stop buying natural gas devices and get the more efficient heat pumps, induction cooktops, heat pump water heaters. And there's a lot of work going on right now to move our society away from natural gas. So Berkeley was the first to ban natural gas in new buildings. Los Altos Hills did it about a year ago. Thank you, Michelle, and all the other council members that did this. 35 other California cities have done the same thing, and there's other efforts going on in other parts of the nation as well. So we have to encourage people to do this. Silicon Valley Clean Energy, for example, provides great incentives to switch people from a natural gas water heater to a heat pump water heater. I got one of those incentives last year, and I know they're offering many more. Okay, let's go to the next slide because I know we're running out of time. So what I've talked about is really 4 steps. First, make sure you're getting clean electricity. Then you can also measure your carbon footprint. It's easy to do. It'll give you some idea of what you need to focus on. Everyone's different. Then measure your energy efficiency through the service we offer. I think you'll find it really fascinating. And then finally, you have to embrace this concept of beneficial electrification. We need to do this because the rest of the world kind of watches California to some extent, and we have more resources than most people. So we really need to lead the way and show people how to do this. And it's not hard at all. And I would encourage all of you to find out which step you could take as a kind of a first step or maybe a second step. But once you get started down this path, it's really pretty easy. Now, Duffy and John, I have some backup slides that could be used to answer some questions, or I could go through them, or what do you prefer?
Okay.
I can no longer see your Zoom meeting, so I can't see the chat box, but
Okay.
I can listen.
All right. Well, John, can you handle the questions? Is anyone on the audience, open your mute button, open it, okay? And we can take your questions if you want to open your video and wave your hand or whatever. And then some of you are familiar with using the chat button. That's fine. You can do that and we'll try and collect that. But John, can you coordinate the questions and answers? Because I think there will be a few, okay? So let's go. And first and foremost, may I just say one thing? I'm sure Mayor Michelle Wu would like to make a comment about the status of Los Altos Hills in terms of what we've done in terms of banning any kind of gas. Michelle, can you speak up about that?
Yes, I would definitely can speak up this. This year, I believe it was the last year. I think it's the last year, November, October timeframe. We passed the city ordinance to ban the gas for the new home construction, except the gas dryer is allowed. The outdoor gas is still allowed, but the ordinance requires the new home construction to use electric space heater, electric water heater. I believe we also allow gas stove, but we highly encourage the homeowner to use electrification for all possible way. And I do believe that the California has the goal of 2035 to be all electricity for the home building.
Good, thank you. Okay, so we have our participants. Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So let's have questions. Any questions or comments, please? For Steve.
Nothing. There's
Yes.
nothing that came in on chat. If people want to raise their hands, I can unmute them, or they can unmute and ask a question.
Okay. Can you see their hand being raised, John?
I don't see anybody's hand.
You mean that Roy Woolsey isn't going to ask a question?
So you can raise your hand. I don't know if everybody probably already know this, but I'm just gonna say, repeat it. If you want to raise your hand virtually, you go to the bottom, you see you have a mute, stop video, then you have the next one is a participant. Right now, if you see 25 participants, so click on that arrow, it pops up. Once it popped up, the participant, you should go to look at the window on my window is a lower right bottom, said the raise hand. So if you click on that, then the host can see that you are raised hand. Nice thing about this, if we have a multiple people raise hand, we can have a line that the host can call out.
Okay, can you see them?
Yeah,
I'm raising my hand just for the testing purpose.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be working in this meeting.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
All right.
It doesn't. Okay, I was able to see myself raise a hand. Probably I have a different
Yes.
Zoom.
I see
Okay.
Michelle's hand go up.
All right,
Okay.
I'll ask a question.
Okay, Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, Steve, do you want to say something about the improvements that are needed in the PG&E electrical infrastructure in order to allow a large-scale shift to electrification?
Yeah, so this is a great point, and there's two big shifts that need to be taken into account. One is just an increase in energy in electric use, which might mean that some transformers need to be upgraded, some lines need to be upsized. But there's another even more important shift, which is if we all start heating our homes and buildings in the wintertime with electricity rather than natural gas, it will mean that the peak of electric use no longer occurs in the summer, it will occur in the winter. This is a big change. And it means that Cal ISO, which is the organization that manages the California network, will need to find resources and prepare for resources that can handle that load. Now, there's a very interesting report that just came out from Palo Alto. Palo Alto doesn't use PG&E. They have their own municipality. They are farther ahead than most other cities in tackling some of these issues. Their utility department just presented to their town council, I believe it was a week ago, a plan to get off residential natural gas. And they estimated how much it would cost to upgrade their grid, including transformers, including wire sizes, including getting enough electricity during the winter. And they estimated they could get it done I believe it was $3 to $5 million per year over a bond issued for 30 years. And that would include capping the gas lines, because you can't just unplug your furnace. We need to also get rid of some of these gas infrastructure lines because they leak and they need maintenance. One of the big surprises by the Palo Alto report was the amount of money they have to spend updating the gas infrastructure. It was a huge amount of money. It was something like $4 to $8 million per year. So that net number that I gave you first, 3 to 5, I think it was 3 to 5 million, is net of the cost to upgrade the transformers and the wires minus the savings they would get by not doing the updates to the gas infrastructure. Much of our gas infrastructure was put in the ground 60 or 80 years ago, and it badly needs to. So there's a huge amount of money that's being budgeted for updating our gas lines, which we could avoid if we could get houses and buildings off natural gas.
Interesting. Okay, next
I have
question.
a question for Steve. Steve, I have a question for you. Actually, it's not a question. It's just thoughts. I know that you have been on the frontier, the pioneer for the clean energy. 2 years ago, I went to Palo Alto. They strongly promote the clean energy electricity. So they have induction cooking, their EV. They also show the home. So idea here is for you is, what do you think of you as a leader to host some workshop for the town of Los Altos Hills residents and pick some home site, and it's 100% electrified home that you can show the induction cooking. You can have test drive the EV, something like what Palo Alto resident has done, to say, this is the way you're going to take. Have people actually go see the tankless water heater. Seeing is believing. So if you can host some workshop to have us all go there, actually see it, I think that's probably a good way for people to take action on it.
I think, Michelle, that's a great idea. In the EIC, our Environmental Initiatives Committee has been talking about doing some workshops like that. It would be very easy to do. We have some wonderfully advanced homes in Los Altos Hills, that many of which have been off natural gas for years. They use a combination of solar PV plus electric vehicles plus heat pumps. So I think that's a great idea, and we should make that available.
Yeah, make it. EIC, I'm the liaison for EIC. Right now, what they're promoting is just the Zoom educational seminar. So we do all the talking, but what I was thinking is the actual site, and also perhaps to show us the off the grid home. How do they, off the grid? That way I think that's the cleanest way. You use the solar energy, you completely off the grid. Anyway,
right. I'm not sure if I agree with the off the grid. The grid is a wonderful resource because it allows the balancing of electric use across a wide range of homes, industry, companies, etc. So the grid is a really wonderful, it's kind of like a giant battery. And if we don't use the grid, then each of us would have to have our own massive storage system that has to be able to survive a week-long winter storm when the sun isn't shining, your solar panels aren't producing, and you don't have a big enough battery. So the grid is an incredibly important aspect of moving towards clean energy. And that's one of the reasons I'm a big supporter, Duffy knows this, of undergrounding, because we need our electric grid to be extremely reliable and fireproof or fire hardened or not able to start fires. And if we underground all our lines, then we won't have these stupid PSPS events to worry about when PG&E turns off our electricity, and we can have reliable power.
That's terrific. Are there any other questions from any of the other audience members?
Question from Mary Lee.
Yes.
Mary Lee.
Yes, about the clean electricity. Can you briefly explain how that is different from the regular electricity that we get?
Yeah, so California has been pushing our big utilities for many years to make electricity cleaner. A long time ago, it was a lot of coal, a lot of natural gas that produced our electricity. Coal and natural gas are fossil fuels, and they produce lots and lots of carbon emissions. The other problem with natural gas is these leakage rates turns out to be much higher than we expected. So the pipes that carry natural gas around the state and around the country are leaking methane, and methane is particularly toxic as a greenhouse gas. So both natural gas and coal are bad. The state has been migrating off those resources for quite a while. The clean sources of electricity are things like hydropower and geothermal and solar PV and wind. On the drive down here through Tehachapi, oh my gosh, there are so many wind farms down there now. It's just spectacular to see these giant wind farms spinning and producing the electricity we need. The other thing that Silicon Valley Clean Energy has been doing, they've invested almost $1 billion already. They're only about 5 years old, but they've invested about $1 billion in future electric generation facilities. And one of the cheapest ones to buy right now is called solar plus storage. So it's out in Central Valley generally. It's just acres and acres of solar panels. And right next to it is a big battery. And it's lithium ion batteries. And that allows the solar production to be stored and doled out during peak times when it's needed most. So the other one that Silicon Valley Clean Energy signed a contract on, which was fascinating, is they'd signed a contract for a wind farm in a part of Arizona where the wind consistently blows during California's peak period. So when we're using most of our electricity, the wind is blowing in this area in Arizona. So Silicon Valley Clean Energy signed a contract to get that energy to us over transmission line. To answer your question, I'm not sure if I got your question.
It's very interesting. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Go ahead.
I would encourage all of you to learn about Silicon Valley Clean Energy. It's a small organization. There's only about 20 staff, but they're doing really good things. There's a lot of these new, it's called a CCA, a Community Choice Aggregator. It's a new organizational entity. It was formed as a fallout of the California energy crisis in 1999 and 2000. So that was a huge disaster. That was the whole Enron thing, and prices went through the roof, and PG&E had to declare bankruptcy for the first time. The result of that was a bunch of regulatory changes that really didn't roll out until about 2010, 2011. And these CCAs, Community Choice Aggregators, like Silicon Valley Clean Energy, are a really interesting organizational structure. It's a nonprofit that guarantees to make enough electricity for us as their customers, and they're making it clean. And if they make any profit, they call it net revenue. But if they have any money left over after they purchase the electricity and then provide it to us, then that goes towards local programs. And we get, because we have people on their board telling them what to do, we get to say where that money goes. So right now, much of it is going towards encouraging people to switch to heat pump water heater incentives, rebates for heat pump space conditioners, rebates for buying an electric vehicle. This is because we need to move everyone off of fossil fuels. So it's a wonderful organization. I encourage you all to check their website and get to know it a little bit more.
Just to, and in addition, as what Steve said, if in case you don't know or you don't pay any attention to your home energy bill, if you want to take a look at your PG&E bill, your electric source should be default by SVCE. I check my phone bill, my electric bill is default to SVCE. You're gonna have to go through extra hurdle to opt out or switch to the regular electricity. So I wouldn't, this is a good, I wouldn't worry too much about the home energy bill that we're getting, because we're going to the SVCE. The other thing I do want to say, sitting on the council, is that the town of Los Altos Hill does have the council member sitting on the SVCE board to represent the town of Los Altos Hill. So just to support what Steve has just said.
Yes.
Who's that?
Okay, somebody's got their microphone on. Are there any other questions for Steve? None? Okay,
Duffy?
yes. Carry
Okay.
on.
I was wondering, with the solar panels and everything, are they toxic and how long do they last? Because are we solving one problem and creating another one down the line?
Excuse me, somebody's got their sound on and it's all muting me, so I can't understand what's going on. What did you say, Carol? Was this Carol
I
Gottlieb?
had a question
Okay,
on solar panels. Are they
Okay.
toxic and how long do they last? And are we trading solving one problem and creating another?
good question. So would you care to answer? Can you answer, Steve?
Everyone, and then just open up Carol.
Somebody has to turn.
There's somebody in my house.
Somebody
Who's
who
got-
just joined.
Everybody, please mute yourselves. There's such a garbled message here.
Duffy,
Steve,
I'm
can you hear
trying
us?
to Everybody, and then
Everybody needs to mute.
Karen's is still open.
Karen, you need to mute. There you go. Not Karen.
All right. And then Steve, do you still have your phone open? Because I see your picture now.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
But we can't hear you.
It looks like Sandy and Donna, now Donna's muted, but Sandy is still open.
Right.
Oh, well. That's
Oh,
better.
well, I think that we're done here with our discussion with Steve. If that's agreeable, can we move on?
Yes.
I want to thank Steve. May I please thank Steve for a tremendous lecture here today. I think we are doing all the right stuff at the Los Altos Hills Club to keep our residents involved.
I don't know if you hear me.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, we hear you, Duffy.
Okay, everybody want to clap and thank
Yeah.
Steve. Steve, thank you. Okay,